The food was still on the table, the cargo was untouched, the ship's navigation equipment was intact. And yet, when the crew of the Dei Gratia boarded the brigantine Mary Celeste on December 4th, 1872, somewhere between the Azores and the Strait of Gibraltar, there was not a single living soul on board. 10 people had been sailing this vessel. 10 people had simply ceased to exist. The ship was still moving. Before this is over, you will understand exactly how investigators, admiralty courts, and some of the sharpest maritime minds of the 19th century looked at every shred of physical evidence aboard that ship and still walked away with nothing. Because the answer, when it finally comes, involves a detail so specific and so overlooked that it rewrites everything you think you know about what happened in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that autumn. The Mary Celeste was not some rotting derelict. She was a well-maintained American brigantine, registered out of New York, carrying 1,700 barrels of commercial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. Her captain was Benjamin Spooner Briggs, a seasoned mariner with a record of competent command who had made multiple transatlantic voyages before this one. He had made the decision to bring his wife Sarah and their young daughter Sophia on this voyage, a reflection of how routine and safe he considered the crossing to be. They were joined by 7 experienced crew members. By any measure, this was a capable, well-provisioned ship with people who had every reason to stay aboard. She departed New York on November 7, 1872. The Dei Gratia, captained by David Morehouse, left 8 days later on a similar route. Some historical accounts suggest the two captains were acquainted, though the precise nature of their relationship remains a matter of historical record rather than certainty. When Morehouse spotted the Mary Celeste drifting erratically nearly 4 weeks into the voyage, he sent a boarding party. What they found inside has haunted maritime history ever since. The last recorded entry in the ship's navigation log was dated November 25, 1872, placing the final known position of the Mary Celeste at roughly 9 days before she was discovered drifting. The entry placed her 6 miles off the eastern coast of Santa Maria Island in the Azores. When discovered, she had traveled hundreds of miles past that position with no one at the helm. Her sails were partially set. Some were damaged. The ship's single lifeboat was gone. One of the 2 pumps had been disassembled. The ship's chronometer and sextant were missing. But here's the detail that stops everyone cold. Enough food and water to sustain the crew for the remainder of the voyage, and well beyond was still on board, untouched and undisturbed. Undisturbed. The personal belongings of every crew member remained in their cabins. Pipe tobacco, oilskin boots, even Captain Briggs's sword. Nobody ran from this ship in panic. They left almost nothing behind, and they never arrived anywhere. The Admiralty Court in Gibraltar convened an inquiry. The Dei Gratia's crew was treated with immediate suspicion. Salvage law meant they stood to profit from the abandoned vessel. And the court's senior legal officer, Frederick Solly Flood, who served as Advocate General and Proctor for the Queen in her Office of Admiralty, became convinced that foul play was involved. He pointed to what he believed were sword cuts on the ship's railing and what appeared to be traces of blood found on the ship, including on a sword recovered from the captain's cabin. But independent analysis found the reddish substance on the sword was not blood. The marks on the railing were ruled to be natural wear. Flood's conspiracy theory collapsed, and with it the last coherent explanation anyone had. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is the part nobody talks about. Of the 1,700 barrels of alcohol in the hold, a small number were later found to be empty. Investigators noted that these particular barrels were constructed from red oak, a more porous wood than the white oak used for the rest of the cargo. This distinction, documented in accounts of the inquiry, is considered significant to understanding what may have happened. Red oak is porous. It leaks vapor. Investigators now believe those 9 barrels had been seeping alcohol fumes into the sealed cargo hold for weeks. When someone opened that hatch to inspect the cargo, the fumes that billowed out could have been terrifying, a near-invisible, potentially explosive presence that convinced Briggs he had minutes before the entire ship detonated. The theory holds that Briggs ordered immediate evacuation. Everyone boarded the lifeboat, tied to the ship by a long rope, waiting at a safe distance for the danger to pass. And then, somewhere in the swells of the North Atlantic, that rope broke. The Mary Celeste sailed on. The lifeboat, overloaded and under-equipped, did not. Remember what I said at the start, the food was still on the table, the belongings untouched. Now that detail means something different. These were not people fleeing disaster. These were people who expected to return within the hour. No bodies were ever recovered. No lifeboat was ever found. No member of the crew, not Captain Briggs, not his wife, not 2-year-old Sophia, was ever seen again. The alcohol vapor theory is the most credible explanation modern maritime analysis has produced. It accounts for the missing lifeboat, the undisturbed cargo, the missing navigation instruments Briggs would have taken to track their position while waiting. It accounts for almost everything. Almost. Because if Briggs was experienced enough to know what alcohol vapor smelled like, and he was, why would he have abandoned a seaworthy vessel for an open lifeboat in the North Atlantic with his 2-year-old daughter aboard, when there were no flames, no explosion, and no evidence of any fire ever occurring on that ship? 10 people vanished from the middle of the ocean. The ship kept sailing, and after more than 150 years, not a single piece of physical evidence has ever told us why.